Welcome, everyone, to the Bigfoot Influencers Podcast. Thank you for joining us for our next episode. And how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing good. I'm super excited to talk about Michael and what he's doing and his new book and all the exciting stuff that comes along with that. So how about you?
Oh, I'm thrilled. Yeah. It's been Michael and I have been chatting about doing this for a few weeks, and Michael's going to tell you some exciting news. So for those who may not know who we're talking about, we are talking about Michael Freeman, and we're excited to have him on the podcast tonight. Michael is the son of Paul Freeman, and for those, I think everyone should know who Paul Freeman is if you're into the subject. But
if you're not into the subject,
right,
he probably has the most compelling, I would say, modern video footage that's out there. That's how he struck me. I'm, besides the Patterson-Gimlin, in my opinion, it's pretty compelling video coverage of Sasquatch.
100%. Yeah. It's most say next to the Patterson-Gimlin film. This is the second most compelling video footage we have out there. So Michael just released a book, or wrote a book, and just released it. It's called Bigfoot: The Freeman Bigfoot Files. Sorry, Michael. And it documents his dad's 15 years of search and research and just trying to solve the mystery here. So I'm just really excited. So I think we should just bring Michael in.
Yeah, because we're super excited to introduce you to him. Hey, Michael.
Michael, how are you?
Hey, guys. How are you doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm pretty good.
Good.
It's nice to finally meet you. Tim and I have been chatting, but we've never had a chance to chat before.
So, Michael, where are you located? And what area are you in?
Spokane, Washington.
Okay. Wow. Okay. So is that the area where your dad got his video footage?
No, that was close to Walla Walla, which is down in the southeast corner of Washington. So I'm about
How far away is that from you?
I'm about 2 hours north.
Okay. So your dad lived down there?
We did. Yeah. We lived down there for a long period of time.
Awesome. Yeah. I'm just trying to get a little background.
Yeah. We'll get into that too. Definitely.
Yeah, absolutely.
100%. So what, how we normally like to start this, Michael, is we ask some personal questions also before we kind of get into the subject, just so we want the audience to get to know you a little bit. So if that's okay with you, we're gonna get into that too.
Oh yeah, that's fine. Fire away.
Right. So outside the subject of Bigfoot, what else? What is it like? What was it like in the Freeman house growing up?
Wow. That's a good question. The Freeman house, was pretty happy. Honestly, we never had a lot of money. I wouldn't consider us to be poor, but, lower middle class for sure. But both my parents were fantastic. I can't say enough good things about my mom or my dad, as far as being parents go. And, I have an older brother and I had an older sister, and it was always busy, just busy around the house. And, it's pretty happy family. From stories I hear from other people and things I read or just, see in life in general, I would have to say that I had it pretty good as a child, actually, with the family that I was born into and blessed with.
Cool. So how did your parents meet?
They actually met outside of Camas, Washington, at a lake. My mother was there with some friends. She was in high school. She was 17 years old. My father was there with some friends, and I guess you could say he was a greaser, that type. And he was like 23 years old, and, they happened to meet each other. And it wasn't long after that my mother ran off with him, and they went to Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, because, they thought that they could get married there. And my mom didn't tell her mother, and they just disappeared. They ran off together to go get married.
They eloped. Ooh,
they eloped. Exciting. Yeah, that's the word we're looking for. And they got there, and they wouldn't marry them. And so it's a funny story. And so my mother had to call her mom and have her drive all the way from Camas, Washington to Coeur d'Alene, Idaho to come sign the papers, the consent to let her 17-year-old daughter get married.
Wow.
She did. And then she told my dad, you can have her now. And she turned around and drove off and went back to Camas, Washington. And, they got married, and that was 1965, I believe. And, they were married for 36, close to 37 years by the time when my dad passed away.
Wow.
Yeah, we're going to get into it, but everything I've heard you mention about your mom and dad, your mom was pretty amazing as well.
So what kind of life lessons did you learn from them?
To appreciate what you have. And that is really the one thing that I learned from my parents. And, as I said, we weren't dirt poor, but we weren't rich. But just to take care of what you have and appreciate the things that you have in your family, and, just value everything that you're lucky enough to have come your way is the biggest lesson I've learned, because the kids, we always had, shoes for school and new clothes and stuff like that and Christmas presents. But my parents did without a lot of stuff to make sure that their children were taken care of. And it's something I didn't appreciate as much when I was a child. But I appreciate it now. And unfortunately, both my parents have passed away. But I wish they knew how much I actually appreciated that.
They do, I think so.
Absolutely.
Yes, because there's a big, your older brother is 10 years older than you, so there's probably a decent period of time where he was out of the house while you were there. I assume, right? Yeah,
he's close to 12 years older than me.
Okay.
Actually, there's 6 years between us. My sister's 6 years older than me, and she passed away, this June in a motorcycle accident. She passed away on June 5th, which happens to be my youngest child's birthday.
Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry.
So I've got that for the rest of my life, to look forward to whenever he has a birthday. It's another anniversary as well. And then my older brother, Dwayne, he's about 6 years older than her. So, we were spaced out nicely, as you can say. And I was the accident of the three, apparently.
Not the accident. You were the surprise.
Yeah,
surprise. There we go. But there was a time period when there was only two of us. And I was, a little bit younger, just going into like middle school, and my sister was in high school and, about to finish, but my brother was out of the house and gone.
Definitely. So if it's okay with you, what we want to do next is kind of get into the topic, talk about the book, then kind of start getting a background of some of the things that are that the book covers, if that's okay with you.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, because Michael, you wrote a book, and it's really important that we talk about that. So let's talk about the style, the layout, the QR codes, the special features. So just tell us a little bit about the book.
Yeah, well, I did write a book, I guess. That's what they call it. My name's on there as the author. I feel like I put together a book more than I actually wrote a book, and I did write part of it. There's some chapters in there from me, 4 of them, I believe. But it's not an extensive amount of writing, although I will tell you, and Tim, I'm sure you're aware, the writing that I did do was horrifying. And I don't understand how these people like Stephen King turn out 500-600 page novels one after another. I mean, it took me months, to write the sections that I did. But, basically with my dad's audio cassette recordings that he had done in private, I had access to those. And with his video footage, I feel like I just kind of put it all together. And then I got some fantastic people to come help me and write some chapters, as well, which, kind of took the load off of me a little bit. I don't think people realize, though, aside from the writing, how much work I did with just the audio version, where I have to go through almost 8 hours of audio recordings to pull out, an hour and a half to 2 hours of what I think is important or what I think fits. And I did all that work myself. Hangar One Publishing and the High Chicks never even got the audio cassettes because I refused to mail them. I won't do it. And instead of driving back and forth to drop these off, I did all the audio editing myself for the book. And I chose where it was going to go in the story and how it was going to be used. and I chose what video was going to be used and where that was going to go in the story, and we had some enhancements done to it. But there was a lot of work outside of just writing, but, for the most part, it was Doug Hajicek's idea to use the QR codes. And I thought that was fantastic because initially when I had the idea to do this, I was going to transcribe my dad's audio tapes. And it was just going to be chapters in the book of what he was saying, but it was going to be written. And so the use of the QR codes was fantastic in that aspect. So people can actually get to hear his voice, which to me, at least personally, is the best and my favorite part of the entire book.
That's so cool that you have your dad's voice recorded. It's kind of like eerie and happy and sad to be able to like hear a deceased loved one talking.
Yeah, I mean, going through them and listening and then listening again and listening again. And at the point where I started to listen to the tapes, I had not heard my dad's voice aside from his commentary on his video footage from 1992. I hadn't heard his voice say anything else since he had died.
Right.
I had never listened to these tapes. And it was eerie. It was a shock to the system. It gave me goosebumps, and sometimes I had to stop. And it was just, it was an experience. And I'm glad that I got to do it and bring it to the world. But some of it was hard to get through, honestly.
Yeah, I can imagine.
I bet, yeah.
So, Michael, I have a question for you. And if you could just talk to our viewers who are extremely new to the Bigfoot world, because I'm always trying to encourage people to listen to our podcast so they can learn about what's going on in the world of Bigfoot, and that it's not this silly thing that, sells beef jerky and blah, blah, blah. So tell us who your dad was and what inspired you to write this book.
Okay. My father, Paul Freeman, was a Forest Service ranger that had a sighting of a Bigfoot in 1982. He was a non-believer at the time, and it changed his life and set off an obsession within him to where he had to prove that these things were real and that he was not crazy. He wanted to prove it to the world. And that carried over for over 15 years of Bigfoot research and an obsession. And he did, in 1992, get one of the most famous or infamous, however you want to look at that, pieces of video footage that's ever been, found on the subject. He's a controversial figure. We won't hold back on that as well. He's been involved in some, rumors or scandals, however you want to put it. But he is considered by a lot of people to be an absolute legend and one of the greatest Bigfoot trackers that's ever lived.
Yeah, and I got to say the book, so Michael was kind enough to send me a copy of the book. And we're going to get into the book's release date, but just, to prep for this. And Michael, I think it is so well done, the way you put it together. I enjoyed it, and I think it's much needed. There's, like you said, people can read the book and they can still have their own opinions, but you
Absolutely.
laid out a ton of information that most of us didn't even know existed. So hats off, just amazing. So I appreciate that. It's just awesome. And then, I forgot my question. I got all wrapped up into that. So you mentioned you had help in the book. So can you share with the audience who helped you with the book?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously, first and foremost, Doug Hajicek, helped me with the book a lot. And he's kind of the one that got the ball rolling on it after I had abandoned the original idea that I had that I was going to do in 2016. And Doug Hajicek came back around this year, and we got into that. And Doug wrote a chapter on the book, which is fantastic and very informative. He also, him and his team and Blaine and Alex Hajicek did a lot of, editing and enhancements on the video footage as well. So he deserves a lot of credit. Doug Hajicek made this possible, for sure. But I've also got Dr. Jeff Meldrum, and we were lucky enough to have him, write a chapter for the book. and he is a supporter of my dad's footprint evidence, you know, but he brings, you know, a nice scientific approach to it as, you know, probably, at least in North America, the foremost expert on Bigfoot anatomy, I would assume, if not in the entire world. Cliff Barackman as well, who's a personal friend of mine, but also quite a famous Bigfooter. I'm sure everybody knows, you know, his name from Finding Bigfoot. He's also the curator of the North American Bigfoot Center in Boring, Oregon, and it's a fantastic place. If you've never been there, you should take a trip down there. He wrote a chapter for the book. I also got Tom Powell, who's a school teacher from Portland, Oregon, who wrote a chapter for the book. And he happens to be one of the people that participated in the very last interview that my father ever gave before he passed away. Jonathan Summerlin, who's the grandson of the late, great Bigfoot legend Wes Summerlin, wrote a chapter for the book. And a woman named Dar Glasgow Addington, who has never done anything publicly with Bigfoot, wrote a chapter for the book for me. And she was actually part of my father's group of researchers in the Blue Mountains. And she was a real pioneer as a female researcher. And she happens to be the last surviving member of that entire group. So she's, you know, the last one that's got any of the stories, you know, left to tell around. But super excited that she agreed to be a part of it.
Wow. Yeah. And definitely exciting. Like I said, I won't spoil it for the audience, but so before we get into there's a couple more questions about the book. Let the audience know, you know, that, you know, more the physical features of the book. You know, it's not a normal, you know, black and white, you know, type of book.
No, it's not. You know, it's a hardback. It's more like a coffee table style book, and that was part of the intention. I have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of photographs that, for the most part, have never been seen by anyone, and they're photos of trackways and casts, and you know, Bigfoot evidence, broken tree branches, and other people. You know, even photos of Sasquatch are going to be found in there as well, and you know, at one point in time, I had close to 600 of them literally laid out on the table. And I was trying to figure out, you know, what to go through. But so the book will include 180 full color photographs. A lot of them are full page size. That's what we really wanted to go for. So people can take a look at this evidence with, you know, as highly detailed captions as I can provide you. They'll have dates and locations of tracks and track size, and, you know, everything we can fit in there to, you know, try to educate you on the trackways and casts and what you're looking at. Aside from that, we also have about an hour and a half of my father's audio recordings accessible by QR codes. So all you got to do is, you know, scan those with your smartphone, or if you have the ebook version, just click on the link and you can listen to him talk and tell his own Bigfoot story. And on top of that, we have about 2 hours of video footage, and a lot of it no one's ever seen. You know, everyone's seen the deduct footage, you know, and that's kind of what he's most famous for. But I also have footage in there of him just looking at, you know, trackways with other people and following tracks and talking about stuff like that. And, you know, there's even a video at the end that is him giving an actual kind of a roundtable presentation and talking about some of his experiences. And I think that in itself is about 36 minutes long, something like that. So instead of just a book that you can read, it's kind of an all-around entertainment experience, I guess, where you can read what's written, you can listen to my father tell his own stories through these QR codes, and you also have a lot of video that you can watch, you know, and go through it. And the intent when it was put together, you know, for sure, was when you're reading the book from start to finish, as these QR codes come up in there, please use them and take the time to scan them or click on them, because they are part of the story. And there are certain sections where I'm talking about something and I left details out of what I was writing, because my dad provides you the details and the part of the story that he's telling that you can listen to. So if, you know, you're one of those people that's in a hurry and you want to just read it real quick, and then you want to go back later and kind of cherry pick what QR codes, or you want to jump straight to watching some video, you know, you can do that if you would like. But I really think you'd be missing out on part of the experience, because it is laid out intentionally to be read and gone through in a certain order. and have everything accessed as it comes up to you. And I think that's the best way to get, the full experience from the book.
So let's get more into also maybe like what your dad, like with his first experience. So he had his first experience as a Forest Service ranger. And was it in the Walla Walla area?
It was, yes. It was
okay, which is also the Blue. Okay, so is it the Blue Mountain area?
Correct.
Okay, so I mean, can you like just give us as well as the listeners an idea of what the Blue Mountain area was like? It is like.
Well, the Blue Mountain area, first and foremost, is a lot steeper and a lot more rugged, I think, that most people realize. It's also kind of an arid area, although there is a lot of moisture that comes in. So you get this kind of strange combination of a mountain range that sprouts out of the high desert, but because of the way it doglegs out, it gets a lot of moisture from the West Coast. And so it's a very lush and dense forest that you get into there. And connected to, the Blue Mountains, connected to the watershed, is an area that's called the Winnehaw Two Cannon Wilderness. And that's 180,000 acres with no roads. And it's something that you can't drive into, and it's only accessible by foot or by horseback, and not accessible whatsoever, pretty much by the end of November. You can't get in there unless you wanted to snowshoe in or be helicoptered in. And if you certainly didn't know what you were doing, you wouldn't come back out of there. It's not one of those places you just walk into and decide you're going to go weekend camping down in, the Winnehaha. But yeah, the Blue Mountains, I think most people that go there, if they've never been there, are surprised by just how rugged and steep they are, even though they're right outside of Walla Walla. So it doesn't take a lot of time to get there.
So can you give us a rendition of what your father experienced with his first sighting in 1982?
Yeah. He'd been on the job for a couple months. He was out on patrol. He was what they call an outrider or a border patrolman. He was responsible for 25 miles, of the watershed, make sure people were staying out of there and, not poaching, those kind of things. And sometimes on horseback, usually, though, in a service vehicle. And that particular morning, which was June 10th, 1982, he was driving a service vehicle up Tiger Canyon Road, which is one of the main roads that will take you into the Blue Mountains. It's a main access gate. Most people that go up there actually use that road to get there. But he had come across a herd of elk that had crossed the road, and he had been asked by a game biologist to follow the elk and get a count on the calves. They wanted to keep an update, so it was something he was, supposed to be paying attention to. And so he actually parked his service vehicle, and he got out and he walked down an old logging spur that had trees that had fallen down across it, and he couldn't drive down it to follow these elk. And I guess, by his words, it was about 3/4 of a mile or so he had walked, and he tried to catch up with these elk, and he had come up over a crest and started around a bend when he started to smell something that was a little bit off, and kind of smelled like a decomposing body mixed with urine is how, he always describes it, and the matter, is that only a few months prior, there had been a boy that had gone missing from a family picnic in the area. And so my dad, along with his superiors and a search and rescue team that would later be there on scene, they initially thought that maybe was what my dad had thought. It was about 72 degrees that day, I believe. The snow had just started to kind of thaw. It was early June, which is about right for that area. And he was thinking, this is probably what I'm walking up on. Mm-hmm. But it wasn't. And, as he came around that bend in the road, he happened to look up and he noticed on the hillside where some clear cutting had been done that there was this creature, and it was walking down the hillside, and it stepped off a 10-foot embankment right into the middle of the logging road about, 60 yards ahead of him. And it stopped and turned to look at him. And he was close enough to it that he describes being able to see its stomach muscles moving, going in, and that he could hear like a low guttural kind of growl come from it. And he describes it as it kind of frowned up at him with its face a little bit. or what he interpreted, and he didn't know what it was. Of course, you know, he always said that his first thought was that it was a prehistoric man. That's kind of what the thought he got from it. But it was more ape-like in the face than human. But it looked as though it had hands and feet like we did, except that its knees never straightened out. They were just bent the whole time. But surprised my dad so much that he took a couple steps back, and he hooked his foot on a rock, and he almost fell down in the middle of the road. And when he regained his balance and looked back up, it had turned and was walking off. It went down the road. It went about 200 to 300 yards, and it went up the hill again and disappeared into the tree line. But it did stop 2 or 3 times to look at him in the process of this. You know, I'm assuming, you know, to make sure to see what he was going to do, you know, after which he, you know, it took off running pretty much as fast as he can, and, you know, got to his truck and tried to get back to the ranger station so he could report, you know, what he saw. But it definitely put a scare in him. And, you know, then, you know, he went back with another employee, and his superiors came, and there were tracks that were found, you know, of course, and those ended up being casted, and it caused, you know, quite a stir for a few days in that area.
Yeah, so I want to talk about that. So I think this is interesting. You know, from the account, your dad had never been interested in this before. He has a sighting, and then he goes back to his, you know, to the station, and he brings, you know, park employees back to investigate. But that all happened within, you know, probably less than an hour, I would assume, or so.
Yeah. I would say, and I don't have a real time frame on that, and I don't think one's ever really provided, but I mean, as quickly as they could get back. He got back to the ranger station, the cabin. He called in his superiors. They said they were on their way, and him and the other employee that was there, his name was Dave, they went back to investigate, and then the superiors came up and met them there. So I would think it was within a couple hours.
Yeah, so here we have this area that, or the, you know, this event that happened, and it was investigated, and we can talk about what evidence they pulled out, but it's not like it was pre-planned, and it doesn't seem, and then there's actual, you know, park officials that studied it and pulled evidence out. I just think that's pretty fascinating. There wasn't Bigfoot researchers out there looking for this. These were
not at this time. No,
right.
This was Forest Service employees that came on scene. My dad's direct superior, a man by the name of Wayne Long, was there on scene, and Wayne Long did make a note and a comment to a newspaper at the time that my dad, you know, was 6'5" and close to 280 pounds at the time. And when he was walking, he wasn't leaving impressions in the ground where these tracks were found. And so even at my dad's size, he was not, you know, leaving impressions, you know, into the road and the mud. So, you know, that is something, especially in regards when you start to think about that later, the Forest Service kind of changed their opinion a little bit and started to, you know, discredit him, because 6 days after this initial sighting, and my dad had, and where the Forest Service employees were up there and everybody investigated, it was 6 days later that my dad was out on patrol with another service employee named Bill Epic, and they were actually eating lunch together. And they were in the watershed this time, because the first sighting was outside of the watershed. They were down in the watershed in a place called Elk Wallow, and the two of them together discovered 2 more sets of footprints that totaled about 40 prints together. And that also was called in, of course, and that caused an even bigger stir than the first sighting had, because, you know, we get the Paul Freeman dermals, you know, from that set, of course, and those are the casts my dad had with the dermal ridges. But what's interesting about the second set of footprints that were found at Elk Wallow 6 days later is that one of the sets of footprints matched the one that my dad had seen 6 days previous. It's the same animal. And the second set of footprints was a new animal, unseen, and that's the one where we actually get the dermals from, is from the second animal.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I just really think that's powerful. And now, had any of the individuals that were part of that, that worked for the Forest Service, years after that, did any of them, come forward later in life and talk about it at all?
No, not to my knowledge. I have never really seen anything from Bill Epic, aside from the original newspaper reports where it's there. And I think there's a few quotes from him, stuff like that. No one's ever come forward either supporting or denying, anything. That was an actual Forest Service employee that was there. There was a search and rescue team brought in, and there was a member of that team. His name's Art Snow, and he was from Milton Freewater, Oregon. And they actually came in a helicopter, and him and his team found 3 more sets of footprints a quarter mile away on a ridgetop that were overlooking. So there's a possibility that there were 5 individual Sasquatch there on that day. And Art Snow actually, has testified that there's no way my dad or anybody else could have got to that ridgetop without a helicopter.
So, it's super interesting. So this is all going on, Michael. And I mean, were you alive at that point?
I was 5 years old.
So what is your earliest recognition or memory of all of this going on and what your dad was involved with?
My earliest memories of Bigfoot are actually other people. They're not Bigfoot. They're not tracks or casts. Mm-hmm. They're not kind of the scandal, or the excitement that was going on with my dad at the time. My earliest memories actually are Renee DeHinden and Grover Krantz, and just these people that were at the house all the time that I got to meet and I got to know. And Renee DeHinden was there in 1982, to check out the tracks, and so was Grover Krantz. And, we all know Grover was strict, staunch supporter of the Dermals and has them in, Big Footprints, his book that he published. And Grover actually took the Dermal prints to the Smithsonian Institution. That's where they're still at. So that's where the originals are. I'll never have those because they hold those now. But yeah, Renee and Grover and Bob Titmus was there, in 1982. And I don't really have a memory of meeting Bob Titmus in 1982. But I have a memory of meeting Bob Titmus later in 1991, actually. And he had also been there in 1987. But just other people really was my first exposure to kind of what's going on? Why are all
because it's amazing to think how you grew up with all of that. So what's your earliest memory of thinking that, wow, there's a bipedal creature that lives in the woods, because kids get really freaked out. I know our youngest son, Gabriel, he's now 19. We used to watch Finding Bigfoot all the time together. And he would go to bed at night and be like, Mom, I think there's a Bigfoot looking in my window. I'm like, Gabriel, first of all, we live in Delaware. There's no Bigfoots here. Second of all, the Bigfoot's not tall enough to look in your bedroom window because we're on the second floor. So how is this for you as a little kid growing up, with your dad telling you, look, I saw this thing and it exists?
Yeah, rough.
So were you freaked out? Were you scared or,
No, not rough in being scared.
Okay.
Rough in having to live that way with your dad being that guy.
Okay.
In that town and having, friends at school or other people, saying to you, well, my dad says, your dad's a liar, or my dad says your dad's crazy. Those kind of things. And we dealt with a lot of that. And my older brother, honestly, more than me, he was, like I said, almost 12 years older, and he was, in high school, and he kind of really took the brunt of a lot of ridicule and a lot of teasing, more so than I did, at that time period. But, it wasn't long after that we actually moved, and my dad got tired of this, and he got tired of the ridicule, and he quit the Forest Service. And if you want to know the truth, I think my mom was the one that was tired of it, and she didn't want to deal with it. And my dad kind of gave in, and we moved back to Camas, Washington, which is, where I was from before we had moved to Walla Walla. And we spent about 4 years there. And, I wasn't aware in that time period that anything Bigfoot was going on, you know, and, you know, also, you know, one of the things I want to point out as well, and nobody ever asked me about it, we don't really talk about it, is in that time period, we'd move back to Camas. My dad was going away on the weekends, and he was going back to Walla Walla, and he was going back to the Blues, and he was making that, you know, 400 and some mile drive to do Bigfoot investigation. Camas, Washington, we lived right by Mount St. Helens.
Right.
We lived right by Mount Hood in the Cascade Mountains. There's a history of Bigfoot there. But my dad was not Bigfooting there. He, on a few occasions, he did. And I'm trying to remember the gentleman's name off the top of my head, but there was a guy in Washougal, Washington, that my dad did go out with a few times and do some Bigfoot investigation. Never found any tracks. Never saw one. There are no tracks. There's no casts. There's no sightings, anything like that in that 4-year period that come out of that area where there's a strong history of Bigfoot. Okay. So for the people out there that think, you know, because there's all these rumors that, you know, my dad was hoaxing all this evidence and he's kind of a controversial figure. Why didn't he just do it in his backyard around Mount St. Helens and Mount Hood where there's Bigfoot history? Why drive 400 miles back up to Walla Walla where you were basically ran out of town and you've been ridiculed as like the crazy person, right? And you've been through all this trouble with the Forest Service and with the news media and all this stuff. Why would you go back there when you could easily just do it at Mount St. Helens, you know, in one of those forests? Right. Like, I always want to point that out to people because it doesn't make any sense. If that's what he was doing, it doesn't make any sense. Like, why would you waste the effort and spend the money? You know, and so it's just another piece of the puzzle, you know.
There's a lot of things, and we'll probably get into it a little later in the interview that I just scratched my head too. That just it doesn't seem logical that someone would hoax things, because if there's things that you're hoaxing, you could have hoaxed it a lot better and it came out with a better result. You know,
well, there's a lot of right, and you know, my dad had already taken criticism in the Walla Walla area. He was already like a tainted name kind of at that time that was associated with it because of, you know, some of the investigations that were done around the 82 tracks and what some other people, you know, had to say, despite the fact that, you know, we have, you know, dermals and dorsiflexion of the toes on those casts, you know, and things like that had never really been seen before. And so I just think like, you know, yeah, if he's this, you know, I don't even know how to say it, but if he wanted to come off as this fantastic Bigfoot hunter, you know, he would have discovered them back in Camas, Washington, where he was living, you know, at the time, and Washougal and Mount St. Helens and Mount Hood. And he had every like opportunity to do that instead of wasting the money and the resources and the time to go back to, you know, the area where he had seen them. And to me personally, you know, and I had a conversation not too long ago with Dr. Russ Jones, and we had this exact same conversation. It wasn't on his podcast, but it was a private conversation. It's ridiculous to me to think, you know, that he would have done that and wasted those resources for no reason but to go back and fake tracks again at a place where he was already being discriminated against. That just seems like you're asking for trouble.
And so, hey, Michael, just for like, again, just to bring you back and bring us back to the new person who's entering the Bigfoot world. What exactly is this like stuff that you're talking about that people are claiming that was fake?
Well, in 1982, after he'd had his original sighting and he had seen a Sasquatch, it had made some national news and it had made some headlines. Right. And then they found the track 6 days later at Elk Wallow, and that added to it and had made some more headlines. And so what ended up happening was ABC, NBC, and CBS, the three major television networks, had asked the Forest Service if they could have access into the watershed so they could do a story on this. And they were denied access by the Forest Service. And so those television networks filed an injunction through the court to go ahead and get access from a judge. And the judge at that time gave the Forest Service 48 hours to prove that the tracks were fake. And here's the key phrase, by way of hoax, or they were going to allow the TV crews to go and get access into the watershed. So then the next day, here's what happens. The Forest Service brings in a man by the name of Joel Harden, who was a government employee. He was a tracker for U.S. Border Patrol, to come in and say that they were not real. They were hoaxed, which is exactly what he did. We have some evidence that he had spoken to Rene Dahinden before he even saw the tracks, and that they had decided that they were going to be fake. We have Grover Krantz in his book telling us that he overheard 3 Forest Service employees talking, that Joel Harden had already said the tracks were fake before he ever even looked at them. And that kind of, was the first thing that painted my dad as a hoaxer, because Joel Harden said, no, these are fake. He hoaxed these. They're not real.
I think what we know now, thanks to, Dr. Grover Krantz, Dr. Jeff Meldrum, and some of the other scientists, is they understand, I don't know if morphology is the right word, but they understand the anatomy of the foot of these potential creatures, which back then they didn't have that information.
We didn't have that information, and we didn't know all of the morphology. We didn't know the biomechanics. The mid-tarsal break, nobody knew about that. Nobody knew about the dorsiflexion of the toes. Dermal ridges were pretty much a new thing. That's such a big deal. And we know now that there were casts from the past, like the Onion Mountain casts that have dermals, but, at the time we didn't really know it. And so it was a big thing, and that's one of the things when Joel Harden was checking out the tracks, he had said these can't be animal tracks because animals don't have dermatoglyphics on the pads of their feet. That's a human trait. And he was a man tracker for the Border Patrol. That's what he was used to tracking. And he was not familiar with the gait. He was not familiar with the foot anatomy. He wasn't familiar with apes in general at all, and had never tracked any of the greater apes. And he didn't believe in Bigfoot. And he was another government employee. And so he's the perfect guy to come in and say, these are fake. And one of the things I get was that, he knows that these sets of footprints, this animal didn't have much of a straddle from side to side. And he insisted that something that was that big and that heavy would have to have a straddle when it walked. Therefore, this has to be a human, that's making these footprints. And that was his decision. And if you ever read his book, you can, read all about that. And that's fine. And nothing against Mr. Harden. I'm sure he's a fantastic man tracker. But I always do say that I think in that particular situation that he was brought in to do a specific job and to say a specific thing, which is what he did. And I also think that he was a bit in over his head because he didn't have any idea of what he was supposed to be tracking.
Right.
But, it certainly put a black cloud for sure, like over my dad, because then he had a government employee painting him as a hoaxer, and the, municipal watershed and the government didn't have to allow TV crews in there. And then they didn't have to deal with, 500 armed hunters from the area, like trying to trespass in the watershed, looking for, this Bigfoot, or all these people clamoring to get in there, to do that. And it stayed out of the news, and they killed the story. And, my dad got demoted to a desk job where he wasn't allowed to patrol anymore because they didn't want him looking for Bigfoot. And he said, well, screw you, I'm out of here. And we moved, and we went back to, where my mother was born and raised. And
she had to be a saint, your mother.
My mother, saying my mother is a saint is, that's an understatement. Yeah, for sure. That woman with more than anyone could possibly imagine. And I think when you read the book, especially when you listen, not what I wrote, but when you listen to the audio and you listen to my dad talk, you'll understand how much she put up with.
Yeah, it was a cool, and she was, I'm just gonna suggest to the audience read it. You see a whole different side of the family dynamic there too. It's really, really, really interesting and cool. I want to fast forward about 5 years from 1982 though, because 1987 seemed to be a really busy year.
It was.
But let's start with the Good Morning America episode that was filmed, and that's and again, if the audience doesn't know the backstory, we're gonna basically what happened is I'll let you tell everyone, Michael. Tell what happened, and then tell the backstory.
Yeah, you know, Good Morning America decided that they were going to do a show on, you know, Bigfoot hunters in the Pacific Northwest, and they chose Renee DeHinden and Wes Summerlin and Paul Freeman, my dad, to be on this show. And you know, Renee flew down to, or drove down, whatever, to Walla Walla to be with, you know, my dad and Wes. And, you know, basically what happened is, you know, they did a satire piece, and they brought in a skeptic by the name of Michael Dennett. He's a well-known name in the skeptic circle. And, you know, I always call it the Good Morning Hatchet job. Like that's kind of what I call it. You know, they, you know, accused Wes Summerlin of not knowing the difference, you know, between a bear or a Bigfoot, if he saw one. If you know the backstory on that, you know, Wes threatened to give the guy like a knuckle sandwich, you know, at the time. And, you know, basically what they did, one of the slick things is, man, they really put one to my dad in his interview on that. And they asked him a straightforward question that he answered honestly, you know, at the time. And what they asked him was, have you ever faked any tracks? Have you ever made fake tracks? And my dad said, yes, I have. And at the time he was, you know, making some tracks and trying to cast them in the garden at our house. And he was experimenting with different techniques to see, you know, number one, if it could be done. And number two, if he could make tracks that matched the type of things that he was seeing in the tracks that he was finding. Because my dad really was interested actually in finding out if he was being taken. Like, is someone fooling me? And is there someone out there that are hoaxing these tracks? And I'm actually going to end up looking like an idiot, you know? And, you know, now it's common. We know Jeff Meldrum's done it. We know Cliff Barackman's done it. We know a lot of other people have done the same thing, because I think if you're not familiar with hoaxing techniques and like the morphology of the foot, you know, then you can't really say for sure what you're looking at when you're finding them, you know, are real tracks. And you have to eliminate the possibility that someone else is fooling you before you can accept the possibility that what you're seeing is something that, you know, could be real. And so my dad, you know, was a little ahead of his time. Now, whether he should have admitted to that, you know, that's another question. But, you know, he did explain, yes, I have made fake tracks. I've made them in my garden. I'm making them for, you know, comparison purposes. I want to see if this is something a man can do, and if I'm being fooled on this. And what happened when, you know, that episode of Good Morning America aired is we have, you know, Michael Dennett saying, well, at least we know someone who's hoaxed tracks or made fake tracks. And then it immediately cuts to my dad saying, yes, I have. And then it immediately cuts to just looking at a piece of tree bark that has scratch marks on it.
Yeah, so they never
TV editing at its
That's
finest.
the way that they decided to do that. And they decided to edit it to make it look like he was admitting to like hoaxing footprints, which, you know, connected him once again with Joel Harden in 1982 in that thing. And, you know, the Joel Harden thing is one thing, but there is nothing like Good Morning America. And that left a black cloud over it. Still hangs today. Like, I have to defend it. Like, we're talking about it right now because it's on YouTube. And you can watch
and that's national media, not outside of the Bigfoot world. So
it's national media. It was a national news story, you know, that millions of people watched. And still to this day, you'll come across people and you bring up Paul Freeman, and the first thing they say is, oh, yeah, he's a hoaxer. He admitted it on national TV. And that's it. And they blow it off. And that's the memory they have of him, without taking into account like the context, you know, that was set in, or the fact that there was some editing done, or the fact that, you know, myself and the rest of my family, my mother and my brother, my sister, and Jonathan Summerlin, the grandson of Wes, and Wes were sitting there in the room. Like, you know, Jonathan Summerlin knows exactly what was said. He remembers it. Like, we all know what happened there with that. And I remember my dad was just like, you know, extremely pissed off, of course, excuse my language. Probably a kid-friendly show here, but
oh no, you're fine. That's I think we've heard worse.
You know, it's just one of those things, and it really hurt his feelings. And I think it was even more so than the newspapers and everything from the Forest Service that happened originally. It was really the first event, I think, that really made him to be like really weary of talking to the media and like what was going to happen. And it kind of set off, you know, maybe a slightly different like attitude, you know, moving forward. And of course, at the time, you know, he was big on, he was going to shoot one, you know, because he knew that's what it was going to take, you know, but, you know, that changed over the years. But yeah, Good Morning America was, you know, God, it's, like I said, I rolled my eyes when you brought it up, and I kind of smirked, and, you know, I'm still talking about Good Morning America, man. And God, I wish, you know, one of these days, like that just dies away. Like,
well, it's so good to hear your explanation of it, though, because I don't think a lot of people have heard that explanation, which I think is awesome. So basically go from 1982 to 1992, from 1982, your dad having his first sighting, to 1992, when he actually catches the Sasquatch on film. So was he basically just going there every weekend, or
every day?
Okay.
He was going there every day. By that point in time, 1992, we had, you know, almost 10 years of Bigfoot migration activity on my dad's Forest Service map that was kept in the garage. And every time there were tracks found, or hair, or a possible bed, every time there was a sighting, or even somebody else had a sighting in the area that he heard about, it went on this map. And him and, you know, David Bean and Bill Lowry and Wes Summerlin, Vance Orchard, Grover Krantz, they all contributed to information that's on this map that hang in the garage. And so, you know, we had about 10 years of data at that time. And what you notice on that map, if you look at it, and that map is in the North American Bigfoot Center on display. Cliff Barackman is the curator of it right now. So you can go down there and you can get real close to it and read everything. It's, you know, he did a really good job with getting that, you know, on the wall for display. But when you look at that map, you start to realize that late August and September in this particular area, year after year after year, and then especially like every other year or so, there is an extreme amount of activity that's coming out of this one area, which is the Deduct Trailhead. And we have Walden Pond there, and Deduct Spring feeds right into it. And one of the reasons for that is it's fresh water that's cold. It comes right out of the ground, and it runs into the pond, and it's viable all year. It never dries up. It never gets any lower. And all types of game, you know, use this water. And so my dad, by 92, by that summer, had really concentrated his efforts on this particular area, because he knew they were going to be coming there. And it was a really hot summer that year. And so the week leading up to him getting the footage, he'd actually been there every single day. And he was getting there about 5:30 in the morning. And he was sitting in his vehicle, and he was watching the pond, and he was looking for activity. And then when it was fully light, he would get out and he would go look for prints and tracks. And he always had his camera with him at that point in time. It was something that he had always carried. It was given to him by my Uncle Larry. Before that, my dad was renting video cameras, which was really expensive at the time in the 90s to rent an 8mm, digital camera, and couldn't afford to do it every time. So when one was given to him, I mean, it was on all the time, and we have hours of footage of him filming all kinds of stuff. And so he knew they were going to be there. And we had the map data for it. And, he had predicted that's where they were going to be, and that's where they were going to be getting water. And he'd been there every day that week, and I tell this story over and over and over, all the time. But, he wasn't finding what he was looking for. And he was missing them. And there were, some disturbances along the bank and some possible tracks and stuff like that found. But, nothing that was viable, fantastic evidence, nothing like the footage. But as luck would have it, I guess, the night before he got that footage, my sister called and her car wouldn't start. And she asked my dad if he would come over in the morning and fix her car. And he said that he would. And so he decided to scrap going to the mountains. And he went to work that night because he was working a night job. He's driving truck for a sanitation company, and he was working the night shift at the plant. And he got off work about 4 o'clock in the morning, and he went home and he went to sleep instead of going to the mountains. And he got up and he went and got coffee. And he always went to either the Flying J restaurant on the edge of Walla Walla, or he would go to Wes Summerlin's house, and they would have coffee in the morning together. He went to the Flying J that morning. He had a cup of coffee. He went over to my sister's house, and he got her car running and fixed it. And this would be about 4.5 hours after he would normally have gotten to Deduct. This is probably about the time he would normally be leaving. And he was headed home, and he decided to turn around and go to the mountains. And he always just said, like, well, what the hell, maybe I'll find a footprint. Maybe I've got nothing better to do. My mom wasn't working. You know, she took a job, and she was at work that day, and I was hanging out with friends. And so he drove up there and got there about, 4.5, 5 hours later than he normally was. And yeah,
and they weren't, they were like, what is it? When the cat's away, the mouse will play.
Yeah.
They were like, oh, he's not coming.
I fully 100% believe that they were there every morning and that they were watching him and that they were waiting for him to leave. And then they were going and they were getting water and they were doing what they were doing, and that they had come, accustomed to his scent, probably the sound of his vehicle, the way that he looked, and they were used to his pattern and the time that he was showing up. And that day when he was not there, when he normally was, they made a mistake and they came out and he ended up, literally pretty much walking right up on top of one of them. And, he believes, that they were probably at the pond drinking when he pulled up, and that he startled them, and that they went, back into cover. And, after he noticed that there were footprints there going up and down the road, when he starts to hear one and it comes out and it goes from right to left across the screen. And of course, I think we now know why it chooses to show itself, to my dad, because there's always been some debate, and there's always these people that say, well, why did it walk right across in front of him on the screen when it could have just went the other way and disappeared? And of course, my rebuttal to that has always been like, God, I wish you would stop trying to assume that you would know a Sasquatch's behavior or what a Sasquatch would do, because we don't even know what they are. And all you're doing at that point in time is telling us what you think you would do in that situation, is you would just run the other way and hide. But there's a reason that this particular Sasquatch chooses to show itself to my father. And if you don't know that reason, you will soon if you get the book or you've never heard of it before. And that's because she has an infant that is a little ways away. And I think that she's trying to, lead my dad away from her baby. Number one, that's why she doesn't take a direct route and go to it. And number two, she's getting her child and she's getting out of there. So, but what better way to distract him from where your child might possibly be than to show yourself and say, hey, look at me, and I'm going this direction. And then he loses her. And then when he finds her again, he actually thinks it's a second Sasquatch, because she goes a completely different route than what he expected, which is, what an intelligent animal would do. Yeah, for sure.
Exactly.
But, I always say, like, my sister's passed away now. We don't have my sister around anymore. But she played an integral part in my dad getting footage, because she didn't maintain, her car.
Right. Yeah.
I have to say, I'm probably guilty of that.
So what's interesting about the footage, and I'm not a film expert, but when I've talked to the individuals, in the book and others, they always talk about hoaxed video, and obviously your dad's video has got a ton of controversy, but a ton of supporters too.
Well, of course.
But the you always hear, well, the hoax footage. You one of the red flags are that you only see a short clip of it, and you don't see what happened before and after. Well, with your dad's footage, I mean, there's a ton of footage. I mean, there's just a ton of video there without him even seeing him following the tracks, and I just think that's interesting.
Yeah, it's about 12 minutes. It's a little over 12 minutes, long. And you get the tracks beforehand, because he discovers the tracks. And, like I said, at that point in time, he's got his camera all the time. He had quit carrying a gun. And he had started carrying a camera instead. And he'd quit carrying a gun for a couple of reasons. Number one, he'd kind of come to realize how much, I guess you could say, like us, they really were, or how special they really were. And he was kind of having a change of heart, and he decided maybe he didn't want to shoot one, anymore. He was also afraid a little bit that if you did shoot one, you probably weren't going to make it home with its body, because we always felt like there was more than one. you know, around, you know, you never just saw one, you know, it's, you know, what did Krantz say? It's not the one you see that you have to worry about. The best thing you can do is reload. I think that was like his, you know, his quote. My dad was kind of on that same thing. And number two, Wes Summerlin had actually suggested to my dad to stop carrying a gun because he might have more sightings or find more evidence if he wasn't armed, that maybe they could sense that in some way. And so it was kind of a combination of the two things. And so my dad was carrying a camera around at the time. So yeah, we have a lot of video and him talking and him showing us tracks and him showing us prints. And the fact that he did that actually is fantastic because we now know we can match the prints in the ground, and we know which individual it is because we have prints and casts of her from other time periods. And so she's a reoccurring individual in the database. We know exactly which individual left these tracks. So it's fantastic that he did that. The other great thing about the video is that it has audio, you know, which is something we don't have with the PG film, right? You know, there's nothing there. So you get to hear, you know, my dad talking. And then, of course, there's other, you know, video after the Sasquatch exits to the left where he's, you know, looking and trying to find where she is. And we also have a period of time there. You know, one of the things that it gets criticized for from time to time, and I won't disagree with it, we have a small period. We have a period of time there where he shuts the camera off, and then it comes back on when he sees what he thinks is the second one. And he shut the camera off because he was trying to track the first one with his eyes and track where it went without having to worry about the camera. In hindsight, he should have just filmed the ground or something for that 2 or 3 minutes or however long it was instead of turning the camera off. Because we you know, I hear some criticism about that, but you know,
I think we all do that. Do you know, like, even if we're just like videoing something ourselves now with our smartphones, you know, we're not going to video the whole entire party, the birthday party. We're going to stop it.
You know, he was no Steven Spielberg, but the detractors and the skeptics say, oh, well, he shut the camera off. You know, oh, he's probably given directions to whoever's in the suit for like the next scene or you know, whatever they want to come up with. Because, you know how the skeptics are. They just come up with whatever fits their narrative, and then that's what, you know, they write about, or, you know, that's what they talk about or whatever. But, you know, no, we have great footage. And then, of course, you know, there's the baby lift, and that's like the new thing, of course. And it's not really a new thing, but, you know, it's more accessible now and more noticeable for sure. But that's certainly, you know, also an interesting aspect of the video is that it's something my dad never noticed. And when he says, oh, there's 2 of them, I guess. And then he later, through the years, up through 97 and everything, you know, talks about the second one being smaller. Well, that's because it was 100 feet away through the trees and he was at a slightly higher elevation. And I think it just looks smaller than it did when it first walked in front of him. I think it's the same one. I don't think there were 2 of them except for, you know, the infant. I don't think there were 2 adults. So he mistakes the first one for a second one because it seems smaller from the position he's at. And then he describes to Vance Orchard the next day, when Vance Orchard is going to write an article for the Touchy Valley Ramblings newspaper, that the second one, the smaller one that he saw, looks like it has a lump or a large bump on the side of its head or neck. Like Quasimodo, kind of. It would be a hunchback. It's strange, scary looking like creature. I don't think so. I think that that's the baby on her back. After she picks it up, my dad is seeing its head next to hers and thinking that she has a deformity because he couldn't quite see it clearly. But he never saw the baby. We never hear anything about the baby. It's, you know, over 8 years later that Doug Hychek, you know, going frame by frame in slow motion through the video, notices this like strange occurrence and says, what the heck is that? And starts to rewatch it because there's movement and goes, wow, is that what I think it is? And it ends up being, if you've seen the enhanced, you know, footage, and Tim, I know you've seen it, and Dane, I don't know if you've seen it or not, but at least to me, it's pretty unmistakable.
Right. You know, and you can definitely leave it to Doug for details. Like he finds the tiniest little things that he has like just a way of seeing things that normal people can't see.
No, he does. And he's got description, you know, in his part of the book, he's got a good little description of what he did when he saw this and the events that he kind of went through in his own home to test his theory. And it's pretty interesting. But I think this point in time, it's undoubtedly a baby that she's picking up. And I actually think she might be using one arm to pick it up. And then it appears that it stays on her side or possibly crawls on her back. And I'm 100% certain now with the research I put in that that's what my dad was seeing when he was describing to Vance Orchard, that it looked like that she may be deformed. He was seeing, you know, the baby clinging to her and he couldn't make it out, you know, from where he was. But, you know, again, going back to, you know, hoaxers and fake videos and stuff like that. Do you hoax a video of a female Sasquatch with a baby? Okay. And number one, call it a he for the entire video. And then number two, go almost 10 years without pointing out to anyone that she has a baby.
Right.
That doesn't seem like
I almost feel like you need to just kind of like, your dad he knows what he experienced. He knows what he saw. He has film. You know, people who were claiming hoax, you know, we were talking about this the other night with Les Stroud. You know, your dad has an amazing film footage, so he's gonna have critics. It's just gonna happen. There's haters are gonna hate, and that's just how it is.
Right. So, and you know, he had a history with the two other events that we talked about anyway. And
right.
So there's some history there. And you know, you can listen to whatever Steenberg's one of them that says like, oh, you know, the boy who cried wolf. That's what he compares my dad to. He liked it a lot of times, you know, or whatever. But that's not necessarily the case. It's more like the person that accused the boy of crying wolf, you know, who wasn't correct about that, you know, situation. But yeah, I mean, going back to it, you know, like I said, my dad never even knew the baby was there. He never said anything about a baby being there. It's almost 10 years later that somebody else like discovers it. If it's a hoax video, like my dad must have been the most patient person, like in the history of the world, to sit there for almost 10 years and wait for somebody else to discover something that he hid in a video. You know what I mean? And I think, you know, I can't say for everybody for sure, but at least from my experience and my knowledge, that's not the way hoaxers operate. Like they want you to see what they've done because they're proud of it. And they will put it like in front of your face, like every time, you know what I mean? Yeah. It would have been, oh, I got a female Sasquatch and she has a baby. Look at this video I got. You know? The other important thing about the video as well, you know, is the body shape of the individual and how she has a distended stomach. And she seems to either be, you know, A, recently postpartum, or B, you know, that infant that she has is a year or more old and she's pregnant again. Because I think of all the photos or videos I've ever seen of reported Sasquatch, like she has to have the biggest, thickest like stomach that I've seen on any of them. And it's actually, you know, pretty amazing. And Mr. Hychek, you know, did have an idea of trying to get some, you know, obstetricians to come in and we can try to get some measurements from the video and compare them to possibly like other great apes and get their opinion on whether they think she's pregnant or very recently postpartum. And that's something that we're, you know, working on. And we didn't have that done by the book, but trust me, when we get that information, I'll release it. So
here's a quick question, Michael. What did your dad think that Sasquatches were?
Living, breathing, organic, biological animals from this planet. Some type of, you know, hominid like ancestor to man or great ape. No supernatural. Right.
But I mean, what was his theory? Like, where did it come from? Like, has it always been here or did it?
Yeah, I mean, him and I actually talked shortly, you know, not long before he died. We had a kind of a conversation about this, about something that possibly could have crossed the land bridge into Alaska and into Canada, you know, from Eastern Russia and Northeast Asia at some point in time, either some type of relative to Gigantopithecus or, a relic hominid or something like that. but I think that's, you know, kind of where he was sitting on. But, you know, my dad, and I do talk about it, you know, more now than I did when I was younger. I'm not as embarrassed about it anymore, but not an educated man, you know, never finished the 9th grade. And if you realized where he went to school, you know, in Missouri, in the hills of Missouri, it probably wouldn't have mattered maybe at the time if he'd have finished 9th grade. And he wasn't, no offense, you know, to the hill people of Missouri, but, you know, this would have been, you know, back in the, you know, late 50s, early 60s, you know, but he was not a real literate man. By the time I was in 3rd grade, I was helping him to like spell and read words when he was attempting to, you know, read and spell and do things like that. And a story that I've never told anyone, actually, I'll tell you guys. When I was in 7th grade, my mother or I always made my lunch for school. I always took a home lunch. I don't know why. Just one of those things. I don't think we could afford to pay for school lunches, and they didn't have free lunches back then. I think that was probably what it was. But for some reason, I think my mom was at work and my dad had made me a lunch for school, and he made some special lunch, and it was some great sandwich or something like that, which is probably fantastic. And I threw it away before I walked into the school. I threw it in the garbage can because my dad had misspelled my name. And it was so completely embarrassing to me that I didn't want my friends to see it. And I am so ashamed of myself to this day at 45 years old that I ever did that.
You were in 7th grade. You can't be ashamed. Yeah.
I never said anything to him, and I never told him about it, but it is something, and it may seem really weird. It's something that I think about all the time. Like when I look back on my life, and like growing up and how I appreciate like things now, you know? So my dad, getting back to the point of the story, wasn't someone that read a lot. He wasn't someone that was scientifically minded per se, you know? And so there weren't a lot of theories on like what it could be, or, you know, if it's like a relic hominid or anything like that. Cause I don't know if he was even aware of like what that would have been. I mean, to be honest with you, and prehistoric man, you know, is the term that he would use, you know, that type of thing. But so, yeah, I mean, as far as I can tell you for what he thinks its origin was, we have had conversations about something that possibly crossed the land bridge at some point in time, and some possible ancestor to man or ape. Hopefully that answers your question.
It does.
Me really off subject with my stories.
No, your stories are awesome.
So I want to ask a couple things. I know you still want to. I have so much to ask you, Michael. It's crazy.
All right.
There's been a ton. There was everyone thinks of the Blue Mountains and they think it's Paul Freeman evidence, but it's not. There's other researchers that are out there. Most of them, I guess, or all of them, working with your dad, and they worked as a collective, as a team. So there's all kinds of evidence that have footprints and hair and sightings. You mentioned in the book and previous that based on all the evidence collected by the team out there, that you think it was a possible family group over that time period of a male, 2 females, and maybe 1 or 2 juveniles. Can you just briefly touch on that based on the data?
Yeah, and that is my opinion. Mm-hmm. And I said in the book as well that the other people that are a part of my book, they may not agree with that, and it doesn't reflect on them. But that is my opinion, based on the research I've done from the available Blue Mountain evidence, and that's based on the fact that we have reoccurring footprints, from multiple subjects, 2 of which that we know, or we believe at least, I guess I should say, to be females that are 13.5 to 14 inches, both their tracks, and highly documented for a number of years.
By multiple researchers too, right?
By multiple researchers, not just by my dad. Multiple researchers. We had Wes Summerlin, Vance Orchard, Dave Bean, Bill Lowry, Dar Addington, Billy Field, Grover Krantz was there. People don't realize as well, Bob Titmus took tracks from the Blues in that time period that have stood up to scientific scrutiny. So his tracks are okay. It's one of those things. But, we have basically reoccurring for a number of years is two females. We can match the tracks. They have very distinctive, physical features. So we know their tracks and their casts when we see them. We have a very elusive Sasquatch that has about a 17-inch foot that we have 2 or 3 track finds of and only a couple of casts. And I do believe that is the male Sasquatch that's there. We don't have any other tracks that are that size, coming out of that. And then, of course, we have from 1992 from Gifford Peak juvenile tracks that are about 8 to 9 inches that are found. So we know there's at least one juvenile in the area. We also 3 years later at Scenic Loop have juvenile tracks found that are about 11 to 12 inches, which I personally believe is probably the same one. And its foot has grown about 3.5 inches in a 3-year time span. But it could be a different one that's a little bit older, and so I do get the possibility of 2 juvenile, not counting the infant, of course, because we know, from the video that there's probably one that's even smaller. But, just based on track data and cast data and what we know, I personally believe that from, let's say, 1986 to about 1994, 1995, all I think is in the area are 2 females, 1 large male, and 1 juvenile with an infant, of course, as well, and the possibility of another juvenile. I also think that in the early 80s to the mid 80s, there may have been 2 other individual Sasquatch that were in the area that are no longer present come the early 90s for whatever reason that may be. And that would be the original sighting animal from 82 and the animal that left the dermal tracks from 82. And there's another famous track in 86 that was not found by my dad, but it's the Tollgate prints that were found. And I actually believe that that's probably the other animal, like his original sighting. It's probably the same one as the Tollgate track. Now, for whatever reason, they disappeared or aren't around anymore. I'm not sure, but we don't really see tracks of them anymore. And then all of a sudden we start getting tracks of the individual we call Wrinklefoot, who has a very distinctive foot. And Dr. Krantz, gave her name and surmised that she was probably an older female, which I do agree with. And then we start getting tracks of, start getting tracks of her about 1984. And we see her up until about 1988. And then she disappears for about 4 years and she comes back around 1992. And we don't have a cast there, but I have some visual evidence of her tracks in 1992. And we also started getting tracks in the early 90s of the one that I called Big Jill. And she runs up all the way through 1996. And Jeff Meldrum cast her at 5 points as well. She happens to be the animal that's in the footage. She happens to be the same animal that was the Mill Creek Road tracks in 1991 that like 9 people made casts of. And she also happens to be one that Wes Summerlin was familiar with for some years prior to my dad ever seeing her tracks and casting them for the first time. And so she's been around for a while, as well. And then, like I said, we have some years of this, elusive male that I'll assume is a male, a 17, 18-inch track, shows up every once in a while and then disappears. And then we don't see him for 2 or 3 years. And so, I'm not sure, like, if he's, rogue and he only comes back when he wants to mate and both the females are mates, or possibly they're sisters, or maybe one's the mom and one's a daughter, that's older at this point in time. I don't know the family dynamics. I don't know the growth rate. I don't know the lifespan, and I do say in the book, like, I'm not going to surmise to even like make a judgment, on that, because it does bug me when people, I guess, as I said earlier, assume to know all these things about an animal that we don't even know what they are. But, just from, my observation, plus we have, my dad seeing them, 2 at a time, we're finding tracks 2 at a time. We have other reports of 2 at a time. We have the search and rescue team in 82 finding 3 more sets of tracks, which would put 5 individual Sasquatch there, on that day at that point in time. I really do think it was some type of a family, and I don't think there are as many Sasquatch or Bigfoot running around in certain areas as, some people like to surmise there might be. Mm-hmm. I think there were 4 or 5 in like a 10-year period at a time in the Blue Mountains, and that's it. There weren't any more than that.
Okay, so I'm going to put you on the spot now, Michael. So probably not in a bad way. And then we're going to talk about how the audience can purchase the book. Mm-hmm. So where are you on the spectrum of the existence of Bigfoot?
So I guess like on a scale of like 1 to 10
or whatever, however you want to answer that. And then what do you think they are?
How about 1 to 100? Okay.
1 to 100.
Okay, that's so funny. That's a complicated question for me, actually. And it's not putting me on the spot, but it is a complicated question for me in the position that I'm in, because I was raised believing in Bigfoot. There was never a question of whether they exist or not. They were just there. And it's something I didn't question. And so I will say that I believe in their existence as much as you possibly can without ever actually seeing one for myself, because I have never seen one. And so without ever seeing one, of course, I can never be 100% fully convinced. There's always going to be something that is missing from my Bigfoot experience until I do see one. And that will always bother me, because that's like the missing piece for me being 100% convinced. But I think I'm as close as you can get without ever actually having a visual encounter with one that they do exist. And despite what people think, it's not just because I grew up as a kid and I was raised in it and I'm Paul Freeman's like son and I want to run around and spout him and glorify him. But, I've put the work in and I've done research on the evidence, and not just my dad's, but the Blue Mountain evidence and other evidence, as well. And I know a lot about, tracks and casts and a lot of other evidence, and, the 10,000 reported, documented sightings that we have. And, if you don't want to believe, that's fine. I mean, no, you don't have to believe. We all have the right to a different opinion. But don't disbelieve without at least considering the evidence that's at hand that supports the theory, of them existing. That's the one thing I would at least, ask from people, because, we have apes on multiple continents, on this earth, and we have the perfect habitat for them in certain parts of North America. And we are very close to places that they do exist. And in the past, like I said, with the land bridge and stuff, we've been even closer to places that they do exist. And I don't believe that it's whatsoever out of the realm of the possibility that this thing is real, and that they are very low in numbers, and that they are very elusive. And that when you go stomping around in the woods with 10 people and a camera crew, it's no wonder you don't find one. you know what I mean? And to answer the second part of your question, I believe that, again, like my dad, I'm on the living, breathing, biological, side of it. I think it's probably some type of relic hominin. And that's, I'm always going to be there. But, I will admit as well that there's a lot of strange stuff that goes along with Bigfoot. And I've heard a lot of reports, and I've read a lot of things about a lot of weird encounters. And I think I'm smart enough to realize, or at least admit, that I think one way, and this is what I think they are. But I mean, I could be wrong. They could be paranormal, they could be supernatural, and maybe, I'm not correct. So, 2 things in my life that I will admit that I know nothing about actually are, religion and Bigfoot, because it's, both of those subjects, it's like you think but you don't actually know, right. and you're not going to know until the actual proof is, solid and undeniable and put in front of you.
That is so true. Absolutely true. So, hey, Michael, can you share with our listeners how they can buy the book and how they can keep up with you?
Okay, well, the book has been released. It was released on December 2nd, and it was released in ebook format and hardback format. So you can purchase the book at hangar1publishing.com. You can purchase the book through Amazon. You can purchase the book through Barnes & Noble as well. If you're so inclined, I suppose, you could purchase the book from me. Personally, there is going to be a special order, I think 20 of them, that are going to be signed and available at Cliff Barackman's North American Bigfoot Center before Christmas, very shortly. So, you know, you can probably pick those up in person or online, you know, through the North American Bigfoot Center as well. And you can get a hold of me. I'm easy to get a hold of. You know, if you go on Facebook, Michael Freeman, pretty easy to find me. Instagram is mfreeman77. I do have a Twitter, but I don't use it, and I can't even remember what that is. And also, I mean, if you would prefer, Freeman Bigfoot Files at gmail.com is an email address that is just for communication about the book. If you know you want to get a hold of me that way, and that's easy to remember. You know, but yeah, I hope you know that everyone enjoys the book at least, you know, or they learn one thing from it. And I guarantee you, like, unless you're part of the family, there's going to be something in there you didn't know, or something in there that surprises you. But you know, it's a tough balance because I want to be scientific and educational enough to appeal to Bigfoot researchers, but I also want to be entertaining enough to appeal to people that are novice.
Which is so important. Yeah.
Which is important, right? And I want
to don't even think it's about entertaining. It's about just explaining things.
And educating, yeah.
Right. And I want to be entertaining, you know, as well. But, you know, and maybe I want, you know, someone who's not as interested in the subject to hear like, oh, this book's cool, check it out.
Yeah.
Maybe they do become interested, you know, in the subject, or they just think it's cool, you know, like I said, like you can have your own opinion. Everyone has to have their own opinion. You can have your own opinion on my dad. I know lots of people that do, you know, and there was some stuff just recently that came out about him. You know, somebody wrote something, and I won't comment too much on it, but you know, it's not in a good light, but it's whatever. You can think whatever you want. As long as you have done the research and you've actually looked at the evidence and you're educated with what the evidence is and the research, and then you want to draw your own conclusion, hey, go for it. Fine. And I'll be friendly with you, and, you know, we can speak and we can have conversations, you know, but it's the, like, I don't know anything about the evidence. I don't know anything actually about Paul Freeman, but someone told me this. So this is what I think now, you know, that's what bothers me. And that's just the one thing I'm asking people, like, please don't do that. Like, you know, and it's not just my dad. It's with all Bigfoot, all cryptids, paranormal, UFO, whatever, politics. I don't care. Inform yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Or you make a one-sided opinion, and proclaim yourself as like an expert when you actually don't know anything. Just please, like,
and keep an open mind.
Yeah, definitely keep an open mind. I think that's one of the things that this book was needed. I think there's so much data and information, and you did such a good job putting it together. Yeah,
but you know, I mean, and I'm sure you know, because you recently had a book which was, you know, fantastic, and I talked to you about that. I was thoroughly entertained. I read it the whole day. I mean, that's how quick I went through the Bigfoot influencers. So if you haven't read Tim's book, you know, go pick that up as well. But I every day I wake up and I think to myself, God, if I started writing it today, it would be so much better than it is. And I'll probably feel that way like for the rest of my life, I guess. But you know, hopefully, like I said, one person likes it, you know. So
I'm sure it's going to be more than one.
And like I say in the book at the very beginning, if nothing else, you know, none of my three sons ever met my dad. They never got to meet their grandpa or their grandma. Right. If nothing else, it's a book of memories that they can have about their grandpa. So,
and his legacy. And you've done a great job with that. And you're also a great communicator, Michael. Like you really, I mean, really, like you've done an amazing job explaining everything, which is awesome.
Oh, well, I appreciate that. So,
and we appreciate you.
It's really simple, you know, and it's real simple. And it's, you know, it's just, you know, I tell the truth as I know it to be.
Yep.
And if I don't know, I say I don't know.
Yep.
Like,
you're natural.
you know, it's a pretty simple, you know, process to go through. But you know, my dad was really open and really friendly, and would talk to anyone that wanted to talk to him. And I think I get a lot of my personality, probably more maybe than I should have, you know, from him. But you know, because we're all you know, very straightforward and very honest, and you know, sometimes that can get you in trouble, you know, as well. But no, I appreciate, you know, the compliment. So
yeah, and Tim and I are really like appreciative for you coming on our show and sharing your stories and, you know, explaining your book. And everybody should get the book and check it out. And, you know,
I was looking forward to this one. And I had told Tim, like, hey, you know, because we had been trying to plan this, and I was like, hey, let's, you know, I want you guys to be the first one I do after the book is released. Like, let's do it. You know? And so we had good timing on that. So I appreciate you guys, you know, bringing me on, and your courtesy to, you know, invite me to be on the Bigfoot Influencers podcast.
We're not the influencers.
I don't think I'm influencing anything right now. Maybe my dad, you know, is an influencer, and listening to Tim's podcast on the Cliff and Bobo show. Like, you know, I think it's a fantastic idea to write a volume of the influencers on the deceased.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, there's enormous amount of ideas. I would enjoy getting into that. That would be fun. So,
Michael, yeah, I appreciate you guys, and
thank you, Michael.
You know, again, if anyone watching has any questions or they just want to chat or whatever, you know, I'm pretty open. I don't think a person has contacted me yet that I haven't, you know, at least said hello to. So, you know, feel free to do that.
Awesome, Michael. Well, thanks.
Thanks again, Michael. Look forward to meeting you in person one day.
We'll chat real
soon.
soon.
Hopefully we can make that happen at some point in time. I'm sure we will.
Yeah, we will. Definitely.
Sounds good, Michael. Have a great night. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. That was cool.
That was great.
Michael's
that
cool.
was so informative.
Yeah.
All I can say is, you know, you can, whatever you can, like Michael said, you can have your own opinions, and we're all open to that. There's a lot of data put forth in that book.
Yeah.
And it's overwhelming in a good way. And like Michael said, I think he said he had 600 photos and he got it down to 180. So,
that's so cool.
And so it's just a lot of information there. So I would, you know, I think it'd be, you know, if you're into it, it's definitely well worth checking it out. So, and this was great.
It was great.
Yep. And we appreciate each and every one of you. You know how to get a hold of us.
Just Bigfoot Influencers, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, anywhere else.
I think
we got our website.
Yep.
You can get the book. Don't forget about the book, Tim's book, the Bigfoot Influencers. You can get that. Now you can get it on
everywhere,
Hanger One, Amazon, Barnes and Noble.
Mm-hmm.
You can also get it at the North American Bigfoot Center. And so it's everywhere. So you can check that out too.
The International Cryptozoology Museum and SasquatchTheLegend.com. So you guys can get it anywhere. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
We appreciate each and every one of you. We're having such fun doing this, and we're glad you guys like what we do.
Thanks for watching.